Hello, I've been playing around with Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG, and I wanted to share some of my thoughts so far. For those who don't know, RAG is an approach that lets you query large documents or corpuses of documents using LLMs that might not otherwise fit into the context window. I think this could especially be useful for working with LLMs on a local network where you may not have the compute resources of an OpenAI or a Google. I also just wanted to poke at how some of these services like Perplexity and OpenAI were built under the hood to see what the plumbing was like and see how much of that I could replicate for myself. So to that end, I built out this AI document query system, which is an application I can use to import documents from my personal library, chunk them using various techniques for dividing those documents up into smaller pieces that I can then store in vector databases, semantically query, and run through an LLM based on my prompts. One of the first books I ran through my pipeline here is Master and Commander. I'm currently running this against a DeepSeek distilled model with around 8 billion parameters. Out of the box, it knows pretty much nothing about Master and Commander, so we can ask it something: what sort of instrument did Stephen Maturin play? And we can query this. It's going to think for a little bit, and it's going to give us some sort of completely wrong answer because this is not something that was in its training set. And here we go. After much thought, we've produced this not very good answer. Maybe a guitar, maybe a piano. Yeah, I can guess too. It's just kind of guessing all over the place. The way I've got this interface set up is if you hover over these, you can see the thinking portion of its token output. DeepSeek is a thinking model, so it likes to output a really long response. And I just kind of separated those out. Now what I'll show you is what happens if we ask the same question, but we connect it up to the RAG system. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out so we don't have any history in our context window. I'm going to select this document, and now we're going to ask it the same question again. This time, we should get a very different answer. I can't guarantee it'll be the right answer. Even with the RAG system hooked up, we're still dealing with LLMs, and the behavior is definitely non-deterministic. And as I'll discuss later, there are some shortcomings to this approach. And here we go. We got back an answer here. This time it says that he played the fiddle or violin. To be honest, what I remember is that he played the cello, but that's a lot closer. And we can see if we look at the thinking portion of it, that we're now, talking about the book. It now is mentioning Jack Aubrey, which is another character in the book. So we've now basically given the model some context from which to answer the question. And again, I mentioned that this system was set up more for like exploration than something you would present directly to an end user. So to that end, one of the things I'm exposing here is all the various source documents from my database, or chunks, I should say. It's really one source document, but we can't put that whole novel into the context window of an LLM, especially one this small, and expect good results. So what we've done here is, again, we've queried this vector database for things that are semantically similar to the question we're asking. And we can see here things that have come up. And I think if you scroll through these, you'll see some of the shortcomings because they're not all that relevant. Some of them are. I'm sure if we scroll through here, we will find some mentions of music and instruments. Here we go. I see at the top of this one a lute player. I'm not going to sit here and read all these to you, but it's definitely picked up enough context here that it was able to determine that Stephen was somebody that played music. Some of the things I mentioned tweaking here, right, you can tweak the number of documents that it includes in the semantic search. I've got a lot of other variables that I'm just tweaking in code right now that I may eventually expose. Getting the right size context window and the right amount of stuff in the context turns out to be one of the things that's fairly tricky here, especially if you're trying to work with the constraints of hardware that you can run locally at home. I'm doing this on an RTX 2070. That's actually probably beefier than what a lot of people have, but it's not exactly a new card. It's not exactly even the fanciest consumer grade hardware, and it's certainly, nothing compared to what's being run in data centers and what people are doing this on for, true SaaS service offerings. So your context window is fairly limited. So you have to try to get just the right amount of stuff there. And if you blow through the context window, you get totally garbage answers. RAG, unfortunately, it's not a panacea. It's not a magic bullet, but it is a useful technique. You do have to definitely refine it. I was really hoping that it was going to be this magic thing, that we were going to just pass our prompt into our vector search and it was going to return the right documents. But it's a little trickier than that. I'd like to continue to explore it. To that end, I've built out this part of the interface, which is really just about querying the vector database directly and kind of seeing how we're doing based on the types of chunks we're using. I think one of the really challenging things that I've discovered, especially with novels, is that what is semantically similar it's really a very fuzzy picture, right? I think this technique works a lot better if you have documents that are very structured, especially documents that are question and answer, right? If I was to, for example, ingest the forums about Master and Commander where people are asking questions and getting responses, then I think this would work a lot better, because my question is going to semantically be similar to a question someone else is asking. So I'm going to jump right to the right portion of this document. But when you're trying to reason about the novel itself, there's not necessarily a lot of semantic similarity between your question and some chunk of the novel. One of the things I've played around with but actually had worse results with was doing chunking using semantic chunking, where the chunks themselves were being grouped together based on LLMs and based on basically asking the LLM, splitting it up into a bunch of sentences and then saying, is this sentence similar to that sentence, and combining them that way. That was actually how I started, but oddly enough, the results I got out of that were worse than if I did a simpler chunking technique where I simply said, split it into sentences, try to end up with documents that are about this many tokens, and have some overlap between them. But really the way you chunk out that document is going to have a big effect. One thing that could explore would be to try to generate that forum, basically the question and answer structure. You could pre-process some documents with an LLM and have it generate, say, questions based on different sections of it. Like, what are some questions people would ask? What are some answers? And you could then build out kind of a supplementary document based on that would lend itself better to semantic searching. I could also explore simply having a bigger context window. A whole lot of the challenge here comes simply from the constraints of the hardware I'm running it on and the amount of context window I can get without basically making it too slow. So that's another big constraint here. Really what you're constrained by is your VRAM, is what I've discovered. That seems to be much more important than how fast your GPU is or a lot of other factors, because to get the benefit from the GPU, it really has to fit that whole model on the GPU. The RTX 2070 has 8 gigabytes of RAM, so any model that's bigger than that is going to fall off onto the CPU for some of the layers, and that speed just tanks. You can still work with it as long as you don't mind walking away getting some coffee after each question, but I think you find pretty quickly that sort of feedback loop isn't particularly useful. I might try running the same system with some bigger models, or even just the same number of parameters but a larger context window on some more powerful systems in the cloud, just to see how that works. Personally, one of the things I really hope to get out of this is a system that I can run locally on my own hardware. But really, this is just exploration and trying to see where the edges of things are, what does and doesn't work. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking with me. I'm planning to do some more videos on this topic, maybe some doing in-depth dives on the code, maybe some exploring CMP. Let me know in the comments if you found this useful. Let me know if there's anything specific you'd like me to talk about more.